address and to raise awareness about the PBB disaster. I also want to take time to honor the sacrifices, the tireless efforts, and incredible work so many of you have done in service to your families, your communities, and future generations. Thank you for being forward-thinking. Thank you for encouraging and holding public officials and agencies accountable for encouraging them to be forward-thinking, to be proactive instead of reactive. Okay, so thus begins our 50 seconds. Heavy 50 seconds. Felt it here. I hope you do too. So, as we've been planning this event, I have found myself procrastinating, waiting to figure out what to say about so many of you. And I think part of the reason is because you all mean so much to me. And y'all have been fighting for a very long time. The Pine River Superfund Citizen Task Force has played a critical role in the past 25 years now, trying to address the contamination of the Pine River watershed. And they have a Hall of Fame where they induct members who are nominated for their service to their community, to the group. Jane Helen, would you join me in chatting about the Hall of Fame and our inductee this year? I'll come back to why I was procrastinating.
So we started a Hall of Fame a few years ago to acknowledge people who went over and above to help get our community and the Pine River cleaned up. The first year, I believe there were 4. They were all deceased members, but we wanted to acknowledge their contributions. So we did that, and then ever since then, we have been adding to that list. Don't remember how many we have now, but the big plaque at St. Louis City Hall is almost full with a little brass plaque. So that's a lot of people who have really helped get our community back to a vibrant place to live. And that's what our goal was. And I must say that our nominee this year was absolutely instrumental in getting our community back from being almost a ghost town to being a vibrant, rural town in the middle of Michigan. And his name is George Kubin. He was mayor of St. Louis for many years. He'll tell you how many. And during all this crucial time, from the time that our group got started, the mayor anymore, but he still sits on city council. But along the way, he was actually sat on our board for a while too. But not only was the town contaminated with chemicals, but, well, you'll have to read my book. It's out here on the table, but the reason I called it Tombstone Town is a tombstone was bought from the local monument company to mark the spot of the Superfund site where people were not supposed to go because of the toxic waste, the radioactive waste, and everything that was in there. And it always kind of grated against us to have a tombstone right in our town. Wasn't the message we wanted to send, a message of death, and we wanted a message of life. So if you've seen pictures maybe of, or when you were on the bus tour, if you saw the bench over there by the Superfund site, by the gates on North Street, we actually, the city of St. Louis and our group, the Pine River Superfund Citizen Task Force, we purchased that bench on purpose and had the inscription put on it saying we wanted our land, water, and air returned, restored, so they'd be safe for any use. And we put that, had to put it outside the fence, but we put it right where people would see that instead of the tombstone. So that was the first thing we did. And then we always kept trying to get that tombstone moved off the site. And because it was written into the 1982 consent judgment with Velzeball, with the federal agencies signing off on it and the state agencies, we couldn't just override it. Actually, the whole wording for the tombstone were right in the consent judgment. So we finally, in 2013, were able to convince the Department of Justice and a federal judge that we should be able to move that tombstone to our historical society and put up a kiosk over there that explains why it was there, and then have it off the site. So that all happened during Mayor Coogan's reign. And that was part of what we wanted to do to get our community back. But the other part was downtown. There were so many boarded up buildings. There was just not a lot of life downtown. And George was able to get grants. He was able to fire people up. I think maybe even the DDA got started during his reign. I don't remember for sure. So that we started to get businesses to come back in. We started to get people shopping. Started to bring the whole community back to life. And then there were the beautification things that he did as well, to get new lighting put in, clean up the alleys, just all the things that a vibrant community has, and which we didn't have at that point. The reason we didn't have that is because the chemical plant was the main employer, and when it left, a lot of these people, they all lost their jobs, and so the community just went downhill. And then to go back a little further, we learned in 2013 that it was intentional. I always gave the state of Michigan or whoever decided to put the tombstone there the benefit of the doubt, but actually we found out that they thought it would be funny. They thought, okay, we're burying a chemical plant site, it needs a tombstone, the town's gonna die, might as well have the tombstone too. And it was somebody who was instrumental at that time of making that decision who told us about that. So anyway, that's how our town came back. If you did the bus tour, you probably went downtown. It's a vibrant place again. And we couldn't have done it without George spearheading that. And we thank you for that, George. And if you'd like to come up, we would like to honor you with a certificate and enter you into the CAG Hall of Fame. Let me just tell them this, George, before I hand this to you. The Pine River Superfund Citizen Task Force recognizes individuals who have an exemplary record of giving time and talent to the restoration of the Pine River and adjacent land to its created intent. The inductees listed below have dedicated their lives to help ensure a safe and healthy environment for current and future generations. Congratulations, George.
Jay knows lots of stories involved in this whole situation, and I personally feel that our city council at the time was responsible for securing safe drinking water system for St. Louis. I think that was our crowning achievement, and it was not done by myself, it was done by people on the CAG and other council members, and my personal hero, which I don't know if he's here, his name is Scott Cornelius, he used to be the state project manager for DEQ. And I feel like between us and Scott, we secured a safe drinking water system for our city for years to come. And just as a little back note on that, I was in a meeting, I actually called a meeting of state and federal legislators and people from the EPA at one time in our city hall. I got roasted in the newspaper for it because they told me that I called it a secret meeting. I was trying to keep it a secret from everyone because we didn't invite the press. But the purpose of the meeting was to get all the responsible parties or the people in charge at one table and discuss what we could do to get that water system in place. And at the time, the acting director of the Chicago region told me right to my face that we would never have our water supply replaced. And so what I'd like to say about that is if you do the right thing for the right reason, there is hope that the right result will come. So thank you very much.
Congratulations and thank you. So, the delicious food that you had for lunch today, yesterday, was sponsored by the task force. Thank you. And also Men's Culinary at Alma College. So, CAG is not only helping to clean the watershed and fight for community health, but they have made sure that we have full happy bellies. Okay, so the procrastination is because of all the feels that I have, all the feelings for so many of you who I've had the wonderful opportunity to get to know on a personal level. And I just want to thank you for your generosity with your time, for your patience and flexibility in working with the many students who I have sent your way. And I want you to know that you have made such a powerful impression upon them. There were a group of public history students at CMU who helped to design the conference program and develop early drafts of the profiles for our Hero Award recipients. Dr. Corbett was very generous in sharing his time and working with these students. They met weekly for a series of weeks. And he talked about the disaster and the significance of community action, doing the right thing when the time calls for it. He taught them about many of you and the extreme lengths you've gone to raise awareness about this. They wanted to be here. They're scattered across the country, the world actually right now in the field, hopefully sharing and imparting your wisdom and letting others know about what happened. So we're channeling you, public history students, Alma College students who also played a critical role in sharing your story, and they've learned a lot in producing a podcast series, as well as developing public programming, a site-specific dance class, trying to interpret the many, many feelings and emotions tied to this disaster. This generation of people is invested when they learn about your story, when they learn about your experiences. And I want them to know big one day, now we've got the power to help bring about change as well. That we need that to be part of our circle. We invite them to be part of our circle. So there are a lot of recipients for awards, and I was chatting with Jamie last night, Jamie Crowley, and I said, how am I going to do this? How do I honor and recognize everything you all have done? It's an honor and privilege just to be right here, to be part of honoring and recognizing what you all have done. And she said, what did people say when they nominated these individuals, these organizations, these entities? She said, why don't you share that? So that's what I will do. And hopefully, we all hold it together. I'm going to start with a couple of people who aren't with us today, but who definitely deserve to be honored and recognized. Alma, who in February of 1976 formed a special PBB investigating committee and began holding public hearings throughout the state known as the Alma hearings. Dick Allen persuaded state legislators to create a landfill trust fund and set it up with wording that made it pertain only to the Gratiot County landfill, the repository of hundreds of tons of leftover PBB from the Dulcibel chemical plant, a location nearby Smith Farm, which we learned yesterday is impacted as well, had lots of residual stuff too. The interest from the trust fund paid for many years of maintenance and monitoring at the landfill Superfund site, which is located on Jackson Road just south of St. Louis. The members of the Bernstein panel, which you learned about last night, or you were reminded of last night as we watched the documentary, The Poisoning of Michigan from 1977. It was appointed by then-Governor Milliken to provide recommendations from experts about how to respond to the PBB disaster. Their report of recommendations were ignored. Dr. Isidore Bernstein from the University of Michigan, Dr. Roddy Kimbrough from the CDC, Dr. Benjamin Van Buren of NYU's Medical Center, Dr. Frederick W. Ohm from Kansas State University, Dr. Nelson Irie of the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, Dr. Thomas Tefley of the University of Iowa, and Dr. Lynn Hopwood of Colorado State University. We thank you. Ed Chen, who was an investigative journalist who covered the PBB disaster at the time for a major paper out of Detroit and later published PBB, an American Disaster. Representative Bobby Krim, who played a critical role along with Donna Alasta and Bus Spaniola to address the crisis through drafting legislation, through the enactment and implementation of policy. His team, Edie and Fred, were incredibly responsive to community concerns and needs. Peter Crum and Jerry Wolter. Peter was the first farmer to be forced out of business by the PBB contamination. His financial losses caused by decreased milk production and dying animals prompted his selling of his farm to Jerry. Ted Jackson. He was the veterinarian who helped Rick Halbert with his feed experiments. Highly stressed during the project, he had a heart attack and died. His nominator described him as, quote, a true hero. His son later produced the documentary film Cattle Gauge, inspired, I think, the Alma podcast. Other notable community partners, researchers, citizen scientists like Walter Meester, David Salvati, Irving Sellicott, physicians who work tirelessly to try to figure out what the implications of exposure might be. Tom Ostrander was a worker at the chemical factory who was heavily exposed to PBB, and a blood test showed his blood had 180 times more more than the allowable level for a dairy cow. His face on the cover of a magazine helped alert the public to the human health effects of PBB exposure. Ray Shunk, Louis Trombley, Chad W. Strickfaden, people we have lost but fought incredibly hard. Dr. Larry Robertson, from November 1976 until September 1978, worked as a consultant to several law firms in Western Michigan that represented individuals whose farms had been contaminated with PBBs. Jim Buchanan, as president of the Workers' Union of the chemical plant, Jim saw that employees were getting sick and tried to persuade management to provide showers and other safety practices. Failing that, he filed a report with NIOSH, which resulted in Dr. Selikoff coming and doing some more health research and inspiring the state to respond. Joyce Egginton is a British journalist who interviewed more than 100 community members, many of them farmers, and published the book, The Poisoning of Michigan, which is now in its second edition and is out here. Dr. Corbett talked with my students for a long time about how we acknowledge all farm families. The list, once they started to compile and think about everyone, more than 500 quarantine farms, countless others that fell below the quarantine actionable level. How do we acknowledge, honor, recognize them? I think through the conference, through marking this moment, that's part of how we do that. By carrying on with this fight and this hard work, that's how we can help to do that. But farm families are represented here and now in this room. You've courageously shared your stories this weekend and over the past 50 years. You've spoken on behalf of those who can't be here, who we've lost, who have fought and fought and fought, and continue to fight. Thank you. Shannon Finnegan, her nominator, wrote, quote, Shannon was the elected secretary of the Pine River Superfund Citizen Task Force, and as a student at Alma College, produced a 60-minute documentary called The Environmental Degradation of a Community. After graduating from Alma College, she studied at the School of Public and Environmental Affairs at IU, Indiana University, and helped bring some of their scholars into working on Pine River issues. She's one of a number of examples of student support for the task force and Pine River remediation efforts. Her documentary, with interviews of a number of heroes we are now recognizing, helped give a voice to many. Shannon works for the federal government in Washington, D.C. Dr. Doc Alpha Clark, whose family is here, is a figure and a fixture in my mind. I had the wonderful opportunity to meet him, and I will never forget the quiet rage, but also the sparkle in his eye when he talked about his cows, when he talked about his work.
much. He was such a great man. He was a great doctor, a great dad, a great grandpa. He loved his kids. We miss him so much. But I heard a lady talk about him and said how important he was to all this. And we know because we didn't get to see him much during that time, but oh my, we loved him so much and we miss him every day. And thank you so much.
So we were fortunate to hear from Doc in the film screening last night, Boise, Michigan, which, by the way, someone has uploaded to YouTube. Thank you. So I feel his presence and spirit. Thank you for being here today. Dr. Tom Corbett. In 1974, Dr. Corbett conducted PBB studies with rats and mice as soon as he learned what had contaminated the food supply to determine possible long-term health effects for humans. He's the MD who investigated PBB and helped initiate Sellekoff's invitation. He's the author of the book Cancer and Chemicals and a new book on the chemical plant disaster. He had several nominations, and understandably so. One of his nominators explained, quote, even in his later years, Dr. Corbett is an active member of the Pine River Superfund Citizen Task Force, the PBB leadership team, and has recently published a book on the Velsicol chemical factory in St. Louis and the health effects of chemicals produced there. He is my hero. Dr. Corbett, would you please join us?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this award. It's been 50 years since we started trying to get investigative studies into the effects of PBB, and it's really heartwarming to see the turnout here today and all the work that's been done. There's still a lot more to do, and we'll keep plugging along and get it done. Thank you.
Edie Clark. She traveled the state speaking with farmers, veterinarians, and scientists, and freely shared information with the press, resulting in a better informed public. Also, she drafted a letter inviting Dr. Sellekoff to investigate the medical side of the crisis, which was instrumental in getting health research underway. Edie Clark was an aide to Michigan Speaker of the House, Bobby Krim. She was instrumental again in bringing Dr. Sellekoff in. She worked tirelessly as his liaison in Michigan, organizing clinics and other activities to facilitate his studies. Edie, are you here? She's not back today. Okay. She was here yesterday and shared some really wonderful remarks, which we have recorded. We'll get online as soon as we can. I know Adam is here. Adam Ellsworth, whose nominator wrote, quote, Adam attended Pine River Superfund Citizen Task Force meetings when a student at Alma College, but his real contribution came later because he paid attention to progress and addressing human health issues related to contamination linked to Michigan Chemical and Velsicol. He became an important source of information that has furthered human health monitoring in the community. Specifically, it was Adam who alerted the CAG, the task force, in 2012 that he had read reports that the team from Emory University was beginning to actively seek out farm families in West Michigan exposed to PBB. He contacted us and asked if Emory was working with former workers and residents of St. Louis. He then passed on contact information, Dr. Marcus. More recently, he alerted us to Elena Konis' book, How to Sell a Poison, and its engagement of the CAG in the task force's efforts to investigate pro-DDT lobbyists, which led to the DDT conference here at Alma College in 2008. Adam has continued bring people together at CMU, of all places, in Warner Hall in March of, I think, 75 or 76. And you, over a few days, came up with a list of grievances and things that the state needed to address, which became part of Bus Spaniela's Act 77. Jack and John, would you mind coming up and accepting this award on behalf of your family? So, as Mary mentioned earlier, family papers in the Clark Historical Archive at CMU, and we're working on processing and accessioning them now. Thank you. Paul Greer, who is featured in the film last night, and Gary Shank were part of the legal team representing many of the affected farmers, particularly the Tacnas. Rick Halbert, who we also saw in the film last night, and a name well known by the community. His nominator wrote, quote, "A former Dow chemical chemist and a full-time farmer, he used his time, skills, and finances to determine the cause of the cattle decline and deaths. Without his persistence, the type of chemical likely would not have been discovered nor its source. Because of the personal attacks he underwent at the time, he rarely speaks about the PBB disaster to anyone. Rick, if you're watching, thank you. We wish you would be here with us today." Sandra Halbert is co-author of the book, and she Rick's memoir, Bitter Harvest, telling of their family's experiences with the PBB disaster and how it affected their lives. If you've read this book, maybe you've noticed that it is written in her voice. Sandra, if you're watching, we wish you were here with us today too, and I know you will come home. So, of course, the Halbert's memoir, Bitter Harvest, which chronicles Rick's efforts to try to identify PBB as the culprit of his herd's ailments, was turned into a made-for-TV film starring Ron Howard, which won a bunch of awards and was Emmy nominated, and in 1981 aired on national television. And in the many interviews that were conducted for the Oral History Project, a lot of our families kind of mark the airing of that as kind of this middling/end point. It seemed to be this moment when the disaster was contained, and there was a little bit of grieving after silence, and then there's this decade almost of more silence until about the 25th anniversary of the disaster, when it comes back up, but then goes away, and then comes back with memories work with the registry, the 2010 stuff. Jim Hall, you gave so much yesterday on the community panel and during the tours. His nominators wrote, quote, "Jim has become a second-generation spokesman for the Michigan PBB Registry, talking to the media about the cancers among his brothers and sisters and the subsequent death of his daughter. Jim grew up in St. Louis during the most polluted years of the chemical factory. He is courageous. He is a hero." Please join us up here, Jim. Thank you, Jim. Margaret Hoyt. Margaret worked We are lucky to have her on our team. Margaret is my hero. Thank you. Harold Humphrey is not with us, but he served for many years with the Michigan Department of Public Health. And soon after joining the department, the PBB disaster became known, and he was assigned to investigate the human health consequences. He became part of an intergovernmental team from the CDC, FDA, US EPA, and University of Michigan, trying to evaluate the consequences of exposure. While some sought to use public health responses as a way to reduce the quote-unquote political damage, Dr. Humphrey argued, hopelessly it seemed, that most of the people of Michigan were exposed, finding, for example, that 96% of breast milk samples he tested had measurable PBB. He also helped lead the fight to save infant blood spots and was instrumental in getting the Pine River fish consumption ban in place. Jane Jellinek has worked tirelessly to address contamination in the Pine River watershed. She is the author of Tombstone Town and long-serving officer, as well as a founding member of the Pine River Superfund Citizen Task Force. Jane, you are a hero to me and many others. Norm Kim, I hope you were watching. I wish you were here. Before Clark passed away, Norm befriended him and over time convinced him of the value of his PBB records and ultimately to donate the records to the Clark Historical Library at CMU. Norm grew up in St. Louis and is a graduate of Alma College. His remarks, which I was so honored to deliver Thursday night, clearly reflect his passion is public health, and he has worked very hard to protect the lives of many Michigan residents through his service, engagement, and work with the task force, his participation in the leadership team, and time with the Mid-Michigan District Health Department. Norm, we thank you. Pat Millard Kivett was instrumental in the formation of the PBB Action Committee of the 1970s, as well as worked with legislative staff, Bobby Krim, and other representatives. She is a friend of Fred Fry and Eden Clark, and I believe she is familiar with Hispaniola. I am just getting to know you, Pat, and I cannot wait to learn more from you. From what I understand, you went all over the state and got food or groceries and had it tested. And that was critical evidence in helping to get action to address this. Please come on. Thank you.
I was not expecting this. Thank you very much. Really hope that some of this younger generation that's around here is ready to pick up that torch and carry it, because it needs to be continued. This awareness, the research, we need to take care of it. So, thank you very much.
And Lawrence, you were in many ways why we're here today. This conference was your idea. says Professor Lawrence. Here they come, those feelings. Michelle Marcus, who had multiple nominators. They wrote things like, quote, "I love her with my whole heart." Plain and simply, if it weren't for the tireless dedication of Dr. Marcus, the PBB community would not have the continued support and information we do today. She has based her research on the health effects of PBB around the questions raised by those Michigan residents impacted by the disaster, and the results are always shared with the communities who raise the questions, as well as published for scientists. Dr. Marcus, you are a hero.
So, thank you, Brittany. I'd like to call up the other members of the PBB research team, Melanie Pearson, Teresa Terrell, and Robert Hood. It has really been an honor and a privilege for us to work with this community that has so inspired us with your power. I hope that this work, this academic community partnership in doing research is incorporated into curricula for environmental health. And I want to let Melanie say something, because Melanie Pearson teaches a course on community-engaged research and is influencing the students and the researchers of tomorrow.
Well, thank you. So first off, I just want to say, watching the documentary last night, I can remember our first meeting and planning to come up here, and we were like, are they going to accept us, these out-of-state people? And you have accepted us, and thank you so much for trusting us with your data and with your stories. And for a lot of you, it's your quality of life too, and it's understanding your health. And thank you for trusting in us. And we hope that we have done right by your trust, and we want you to know that we're going to continue to work on your behalf with this. And with our students, I use you as an example all the time. Janie and I was just telling you how I talk to my students about the lived experience and how much we need that in our science and to really understand our science. But also all your skill sets, which I rely on a lot. Jane Ann's data science, right? Jane Keon writes for us, right? We're always picking out the different skill sets. I mean, there's professionals in this. Obviously, Tom's a doctor, Riley's a nurse, Terry's a nurse. Y'all helped us collect our data as well as guide the research and make sure that we're staying true to the purpose and making sure that our research is relevant to you and answering your concerns. So thank you so much for honoring us today, but really thank you so much for accepting us as part of your community.
And I should add that Melanie and Teresa also are recipients of Hero Awards. So is the PBB Citizen Advisory Board. So Jane Ann and Bonnie, would you please join us up here and accept a Hero Award? So in many ways, the PBB represents the ongoing activism that I think the PBB Action Committee started in the 70s. And they work really closely with the registry. They are an important part of this work. Either of you both know what this is.
I would just like to say that my heroes are all of you who participated in the Emory Research Project. I mean, you came to those clinics through rain, snow, sleet, and hail to fill out very lengthy to this project so that we can learn more about these health effects of PBB.
I'm very honored and humbled to receive this award, and I've talked to so many people who say, I'm just one person, what can I do? Beyond telling your stories, take a look at your skill set. Everybody has unique gifts to offer, and there are so many aspects of this research and work that we need to do. Bonnie made significant contributions as a nurse, doing field study work, drawing blood samples. I'm a data scientist. I'm able to work with the university to structure their data, to get grant funding for further research and maintenance of the data. And Jane is a writer, a journalist. She writes so much material for us. You have skills. Bring them to us. We need you. Thank you.
Okay, so an important part of this work is funding, and the National Institute of Environmental Sciences, which is part of the NIH, is also a recipient of a PBB Hero Award. And their leadership sent us a video to let you all know how much that means to them.
Greetings from North Carolina. Thank you, Brittany and the planning team, for nominating the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences for the PBB Hero Award. We regret that we cannot be with you to commemorate this solemn 50th anniversary. However, we are there with you in spirit. On behalf of the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences and my colleagues Kimberly Gray and Melissa Smar, I wish to express our sincere gratitude for this recognition. It has been an honor and a privilege to contribute to your successes. You have achieved so much over the last 50 years, facing great odds and never giving up in your quest for answers. You are a true testament to the value and importance of community engagement and local knowledge. Your recent publication on your oral histories clearly demonstrates this fact. You have shaped science, you have informed policy, and you have promoted public health. You have found and nurtured a great community university team, working collaboratively with a multidisciplinary group of folks like Michelle Marcus, Melanie Pearson, Brittany Fremian, Amy Schultz, and many other academics who took the time to listen, to learn, and to act in partnership with you. As one of your program officers, it has been an honor to contribute in a small way to enable you to answer your questions, to develop and test your solutions, and to communicate your findings so that a disaster of this magnitude does not happen again. We wish you and all the attendees a successful conference as you reflect on past events, share critical lessons learned, and inspire continued action. Thanks again for the PBB Hero Award, and we look forward to hearing more about your accomplishments. We look forward to working with you more in the future. Best of luck to all of you for a continued successful meeting. Thank you and have a good day.
Oh, that was lovely. Thank you, Liam. Okay. The Pine River Superfund Citizen Task Force this year marks 25 years of tireless work. Thank you. You are heroes to us. Jane, Ed, Margaret, Gary, Jim, Gary, and any other members who might be here from the task force. Please come up so we can honor and recognize you.
we were gonna be in this for 25 years. I guess we do. Prepare differently than that. I didn't know.
Wouldn't have been super fun. No, I don't have anything. That's the work we gotta do.
And the Super Fund is accepting members. I recently was incorporated as the Michigan Fire Families Group. We were incorporated into their.
Push it up.
The Michigan Fire Families were incorporated into the CAG group, so that's why I'm here.
Just want to add, dues are $5 a year, so we're kind of affordable.
Mr. Gary Smith, if you want to hang out up here. Gary Smith.
What?
If you would like to hang out here. Your nominators wrote,
I was nominated for what?
you're a hero, what? Your nominators wrote, quote, as a past employee of the chemical factory and a lifelong resident of St. Louis, Gary knew and knows many of the former chemical workers. He tirelessly maintained that the workers should be included in the PBB studies, and when a grant was received to include them, he personally contacted over 100 people to let them know about the latest health studies being conducted by Emory University. He is a founding member of the Pine River Superfund Citizen Task Force and has served as the treasurer for almost 25 years. I think he and the other members of the CAG also deserve honorary degrees in chemistry and grant writing and keep going. Okay, cartography and biology, all the things. Gary, you are my hero.
No.
Joanne Scout is a task force member as well. She isn't here today, but I hope is tuning in remotely. Joanne grew up in St. Louis and started health study. She started the multi-generational Pine River Superfund Voluntary Health Map, which is a questionnaire that former and current residents of St. Louis complete. She's gathered over 600 surveys and done a popular epidemiology study to try to document the long-term health outcomes from geography, from living in a community heavily contaminated. Joanne, you are a PBB hero, and we wish you were here today. Oh, thank you, Jim. Your brother is here to accept the award under.
Yeah, Big Brother's gonna protect it.
That's right. Do you want to say anything for Joanne? I don't know, Joanne, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Joanne.
Francis Bus Daniel. Was a member of the Michigan House of Representatives from 1975 to 1990. He was the author of the Spaniola Bill passed in 1977, lowering the PBB tolerance to a level that eliminated PBB from the food chain. It also provided funding for the long-term health study and loans to farmers. Mas, please join us up here and accept the award. Would you like to say something?
Thank you very much. I'm deeply honored to be recognized for just doing my job. And I want to just to add this, to ask all of you to continue your work because there's much, much more to accomplish. Thank you so very much. I deeply appreciate it.
Val Susko grew up on a farm in the Thumb and witnessed PBB contamination firsthand.
source for those seeking to understand this disaster. Val, are you here? Okay. Val, we're thinking of you. Roy and Marilyn Takama. They were part of the longest trial in Michigan history. Roy recently passed away. In 2019, I had the great honor of meeting with Roy and Marilyn and conduct an oral history interview. I'll never forget what you said. Marilyn, after reflecting upon the trial, you said, quote, "I think we were called to do that." It's such a tremendous example of how much community members have sacrificed and fought to address this disaster. It's an example of your sense of duty and service to your community and beyond. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, thank you very much. And I will say a few words. My husband passed away a couple years ago. And I don't feel like a hero, but we were chosen to represent many other farmers when we went to the trial that was held in Cadillac, which lasted a year. And Roy and I went to every one of those court sessions. And I know that in its own way it was used to expose the dangers of PBB and to encourage further research. Thank you again.
Doug and Mary Jo Warner ran a farm exposed to PBB and were the first humans to have their blood tested for PBB in 1985. They also helped bring the disaster to national attention through an interview that was published by the New York Times. We have family members here. We're thinking of you. Okay. George Cupid, you were also a PBB hero. You heard a lot about George from Jane, and I don't think my comments they don't stand a chance. George, do you want to say anything else? Thank you so much, George. Okay, so there are many more heroes in this room. Thank you for your service and dedication to this issue, for your tireless work, and for allowing us to be part of the journey and the fight. We're here for you. We appreciate you. Thank you. Okay, we will shift into a community meeting with the Emory team.
Great, so we've already been introduced. My name is Melanie Pearson, and we're going to end by just sharing some of the research results with you, some of our most recent research results. We know this has been a long conference, and we're at the end of it. So we are going to respect your time and try to move us through it. Some of our team members are handing out some of the information that we have. The first thing I want to say and tell her is this has been a community partnership. Michelle brought me on, I think it's been 12 years ago, it could be 13, and asked me to help her engage with the community, to share the results, and to learn to partner with the community on this research. And that's what we've done, and if you get the handouts that are coming around, you'll see that during our community meetings, you have asked us really important questions that we have tried to translate into research questions so we can be responsive and bring this information back to you. Early on, we heard, is the PBB in our bodies, and how long does it stay in our bodies? So we wanted to address that. We've heard, how does PBB and our bodies affect our children? So we've tried to do some research on that. Does PBB cause cancer? How can my doctor learn about PBB? Does PBB cause arthritis? We've heard of that quite a bit. And one question we heard a lot when we came back and shared the results of how much PBB was still remaining in Michigan's body, we as scientists were thinking about how is that still affecting health? What is that continued health impact? But instead, the community members said to us, how can we get it out of our bodies? Right? That was your question. And so we designed an entire research project around that to try to address it. So one thing I just want to say, you've heard about a lot of our community partnerships. We meet with the community partners monthly, right? These are monthly calls that folks are dedicating their time to, and we appreciate it so much. And Liz, I just want to add you, because you were noted before, the Mid-Michigan District Health Department is also a big part of our partnership, providing us clinical space and providing phlebotomists to help us with blood draws. And Alma has provided us with computers. I mean, this is truly a collaborative effort. So thank you to everyone in the room with that. One thing that's being handed out that's coming around on these bright pieces of cards are kind of like an attendance record for us. As you just saw Liam on here, they fund our research, and they want to know how many people show up at these meetings, how many people still care about this research. Is it still important to them? And so we're asking you to fill this out if you're willing. And if you don't want to give us your information, you don't have to do that, but still please answer the questions so that we know we have a count of how many people are here today. So I don't think she needs an introduction. Michelle's been part of the conference, and you've seen her multiple times. And for those of you who have familiar faces, you've seen us at community meetings. But I just want to say, the work I do is to really try to make the science that my department does more relevant to the communities that are impacted by the pollution. And normally, I go to the scientists and I say, how can I facilitate the work you do? How can we engage with the community that's affected by the chemical that you're investigating, right? But Michelle did the opposite. Michelle came to me and she said, this is important. I've never been able to meet with the community before. This was 12 years ago. Everything had to go through the state health department. She didn't have any direct line to the community. And she said, will you help me go out and share the research and help me figure out how I can partner and collaborate with the community? And to me, that was like a wild thing that I wasn't having to force myself on a scientist, but instead the scientist was coming and inviting me in. So I just want to let y'all know this relationship between both me and Michelle and us with y'all is all based on her genuine interest to make this research relevant to you and make it meaningful, knowing that these are livelihoods, that this isn't just scientific data. And so with that, I just want to hand the mic over to Michelle. And while Michelle's setting up, I do want to ask one thing. How many of you have never attended one of our research community meetings before? Just by a show of hands. So we have, okay, a good number. That helps us know where to start. Thank you.
That's great. Yeah, thank you very much. So I want to start by just mentioning briefly how I became involved. People always ask me, you're from Atlanta, Georgia. How did you get involved in this research here in Michigan? And the answer is, I wasn't always from Atlanta. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and my first job after getting my PhD was to work with Irving Seligman at Mount Sinai School of Medicine. And he was a wonderful mentor to me, and he was way ahead of his time in terms of his ability to communicate science to people and to care about individuals who were impacted by environmental and occupational exposures. And so because I had that time with Irving Selikoff and with a number of the other Mount Sinai researchers that had come here to Michigan to do a health evaluation in the early days, in the 1980s, I knew about the PBB incident. And when I came to Atlanta, I was involved with the National Center for Environmental Health at the CDC. And at that time, it was in the early 1990s, and there were a lot of concerns about the effects of all these synthetic chemicals on people's health. And those of you who were here Friday night, who heard Thursday night, who heard Elena Konis talk about this, there have been, literally hundreds of thousands of synthetic chemicals introduced into commerce in the past 100 years. And we have also seen during this same time increases in health effects, particularly those involving the endocrine system. So I think Dr. Corbett mentioned this morning, sperm counts were going down, girls are maturing earlier, there have been increases in breast cancer and testicular cancer. There were also health effects in wildlife that were noted, immune function, and also feminization of male fish. There was a big study of alligators that had tiny penises. This caused a lot of concern. So when I was at the CDC, we were asked, so is this really a public health problem? All we have are these trends over time, and that's not very strong evidence. There's some animal studies, but we don't really know, is this a public health problem? Is this happening to people? And because I had worked with Irving Selikoff and the folks at Mount Sinai, I knew about the incident, and I knew that there were a large number of people here who were exposed to PBB, and I was concerned that they might be experiencing these health problems that we're seeing increasing all across the United States and Europe. So, I think I'll skip that. So, the State Health Department developed a PBB registry, or the long-term PBB study, in the late 1970s. They initially enrolled about 4,000 individuals who were primarily farm families that lived on the quarantine farms and people who got food from those quarantine farms. They did enroll the chemical workers initially, but then they dropped them in 1990. And one of the reasons they dropped them was because the chemical plant also made DDT and lots of other chemicals, and they thought this was too difficult to study. And as you heard, years later, when we were doing our research with primarily the farm families, the folks at the Pine River Superfund Citizen Task Force were outraged that they were left out of this research, and they had wanted a research study for a very long time. So I was contacted by Ed Lorenz, and we had a meeting up here, and we now have techniques to be able to measure multiple chemicals and to try to incorporate this assessment of health effects, taking into account many chemicals at the same time. So thanks to the folks at NIEHS who were funding our research, we went back to them and we said, look, there's this large group of chemical workers and residents around the chemical plant who had high exposure, and we think they need to be included in this research. And they agreed with us, and they gave us supplementary funds to bring the chemical workers back into the registry. And I have to just say, give Bonnie credit for doing a pilot study and drawing blood from 20 volunteers so that we could demonstrate that, in fact, the chemical workers still had high levels of PBB, and that was instrumental in getting the funding to bring the chemical workers back into the study. So we also included the children of registry members, and that's because of some of the unfortunate characteristics of PBB, and I think you've heard a little bit about this. PBB lasts a very long time. It's very persistent in the human body. It's stored in body fat, and it can, unfortunately, cross the placenta, and it can expose the developing child. Because it's in fat, it also is transmitted in the breast milk, so that, because breast milk has a very high fat content. So we felt it was very important to look at the children of women who are exposed, and in a minute I'm going to tell you that the children of men who were exposed also had some health effects. But the impact of PBB, based on animal studies at that point, pointed to the fact that it could be a disruptor of the endocrine system. It can interfere with the body's naturally occurring hormones. Okay. So just before I review the health impacts, I just want to say a little bit about how we look at the health effects of PBB. So first of all, the risk of developing disease is dependent on your genes, and your environmental exposures, your diet, and your physical activity, sometimes your occupation. And so it's important to have that in mind, and that's also why we can never pinpoint whether it's the PBB that caused the specific condition in an individual. We can only say that there's an increased risk of developing this disorder among people who are exposed, but we can't say whether it would have happened anyway, or if you are one of those extra cases that wouldn't have happened without the exposure. So the way we look at it is we compare the people in the registry, in the long-term study, who had very low exposure to people who had higher exposure, and we also compare the health of people in the registry to the U.S. population as a whole. So in the early 1980s, the first studies that were done, and many of these were done by the Mount Sinai team of Irving Selikoff, but they were also teams from the University of Michigan and Wayne State University. And, you know, and if you watch the documentary last night, you know, the Selikoff team was quoted as saying that there was a high prevalence of unusual symptoms. What were the unusual symptoms? Skin rashes, hair loss, memory problems, and muscle and joint problems. And they were able to show that there were high rates. Unfortunately, they were not able to show that the rates depended on the level of PBB. And that's one of the reasons that this evidence was dismissed in those court cases. So then we picked up the research about 20 years after the incident in the 90s. And some of the things that we found among people who were exposed as adults was an increased risk of thyroid problems. And because this work was done in collaboration with the community, with you guys, we heard from people who said, I suffered from an undiagnosed thyroid condition for 2 years, and if only I had known that I had high PBB, and if my doctor knew that PBB could affect the thyroid, maybe I could have gotten this diagnosis early. And this was a recurring theme is throughout the work that we've done, that people told us that their doctors didn't know anything about PBB or would dismiss their concerns or say, that was a long time ago, it can't be affecting your health now. And we know that PBB stays in the body for a long time. It takes about 15 years for your body to get rid of half of the PBB that it had, and then another 15 years to cut that in half, and another 15. So it persists for a very long time. Now, I think Dr. Corbett mentioned there was another research group at MD Anderson that looked at cancers, and they found an increased risk of lymphoma and GI cancers. And we did our own cancer study a few years after that, and we found an increased risk of breast cancer among the women who were exposed. And because of this, all of this cancer research, which was predicted by the animal studies, the World Health Organization and the US EPA have designated PBB as a probable human carcinogen. So we also found among women who were exposed in childhood, we found menstrual cycle abnormalities and alterations in hormone levels. And, we were really concerned about the children of women who were exposed. As I said, the children are exposed in the womb and through breastfeeding. And one of the things that we were concerned about is this issue of early menarche, early age at first menstrual period. As I said, there have been trends over time of girls maturing early. So that was one of the most striking findings. Early findings was that among the daughters of women with high exposure, that they had their first menstrual period a full year earlier than women who were in the low exposure group. And, when I presented these results at scientific and medical meetings, people would say, well, that's only a year difference. What difference does that make? It's not a big deal. But you have to realize that that was the difference on average. And then you always have people at the extremes. And when we held our first community meeting, I will never forget this moment when a woman came up to me and told me that her daughter had her first menstrual period at age 5. Oh, God. And I was just moved to tears. I could not absorb that information. And, it made me realize how important it is to talk to people and to understand the extent of the range of responses in the community, and just reporting average response, average effects, does not capture the whole picture. It's just critically important. Unfortunately, we also found that the women, the girls who were exposed in the womb and through breastfeeding, when they reached reproductive age, they had an increased risk of miscarriages, and that their risk was related to the dose of PBB that they received in the womb. And that's really important because, as Tom Corbett said, the developing embryo is exquisitely sensitive to environmental chemicals. Everything has to be orchestrated, very, very fine control over the development of organs and limbs and the regulation of the reproductive system and the hormone system. pubertal development. So among the girls, it was accelerated. Among the boys, it was slower. And they were more likely to be born with abnormalities of the urinary and the genital tract. So now we come to the point where our latest round of funding, where we were able to ask for funding for specific research projects that were your priorities. And so those studies are underway. First, we measured PBB in about 1,500 people, and I think this slide is in your packet on the table. And just a couple of things to keep in mind is that PBB is measured in parts per billion, and frequently you'll hear people say, well, that's such a tiny amount, how could that affect my health? And it's equivalent to one drop in a backyard swimming pool, but in fact, your body's own hormones work at those concentrations. That, in fact, is how they work. Okay, so if you look at that graph that covers like 1,500 people that were exposed, you can see a couple of vertical bars. And if you look at where it says NHANES 95th percentile, so NHANES is a nationally representative survey done by the CDC every few years, and they measured PBB in the U.S. general population. And so that vertical bar represents the 95th percentile, meaning that 95% of Americans have a level below that amount. And if you look at this graph, which shows those that we measured in Michigan, you can see that 60% of the people that we tested still had elevated levels 40, 50 years later. So I forgot to say, interrupt me with questions. So are any questions so far on anything that I've said? Yes?
Is there anything to do with the different blood types?
So we have not investigated whether someone's blood type affects their susceptibility to these health events. So no, we have not studied that. So I think you also have the graph of the different groups. So this shows you who is the most highly exposed, and you can see on the left that the chemical workers, as expected, had the highest levels of exposure. And that's so the chemical workers, unfortunately we learned that they were told that PBB was safe enough to eat. They took no precautions. There was no facility for them to shower before they went home. And unfortunately, in addition to ingesting the PBB in the contaminated food, the chemical workers would inhale the dust and get exposed that way. And also, PBB can be absorbed through the skin. So if they would get it on their clothes, it can also, and if they weren't wearing protective equipment, it can be absorbed through the skin. And then the next highest group are the farm families, those who either lived on a quarantine farm or got food from a quarantine farm. And I think the low-level farms are included in here as well as the farm families. And then, unfortunately, the third highest group were the chemical workers' family members. And that, to me, is the most tragic or because it was avoidable. If there were facilities for the workers to shower and change before they came home, they would not have brought this exposure home to their families. There's no reason. There's just no reason for that. And the Pine River residents also have elevated levels, and the other residents who lived in Michigan at the time and probably purchased contaminated food in their local supermarkets, grocery stores, etc. But you can see the little bar all the way over to the right is the U.S. national average, which is tiny, so that all of these groups have massively elevated levels compared to the general population exposure, and the offspring who were born after 1974, 1975, on average, they did not have elevated exposure, although we did do some studies specifically of the children of women with high exposure, and we did find that there was a relationship between the mother's level and the child's level, and that if the child was breastfed, that they were more likely to have measurable levels of PBB. And those of you who participated in the lunch on Saturday, learned that a study done in Detroit, Michigan, of young women in their 30s also found, in Detroit, found that if they were breastfed for more than 3 months, they were much more likely to have an elevated PBB level. So we also tried to understand the biological mechanism for some of these effects. What does PBB actually do to the body? And one of the ways we looked at it is to look at gene regulation. And so in addition to your actual DNA, which is the same in every cell of your body, there are, as Dr. Corbett said, apps, or there are actually methyl groups and other mechanisms that turn some genes on and some off, and they determine the level of gene expression. And that's how some cells are blood cells, some are skin cells, some are muscle cells. And what we found was that the genes that are involved in hormone regulation, those were impacted by PBB. Those that were involved in immune function were affected by PBB. And we also found, unfortunately, that in the sperm of men who were exposed, we found abnormal methylation, abnormal gene regulation in their sperm. So some of the important points about the health effects were that PBB appears to be acting as a hormone disruptor. It increases the risk of thyroid disorders, reproductive problems, and cancer. And that children of exposed women are shown to be affected, and that 60% of people recently tested still had high levels of PBB. Now, it's also important, on the male side, that we looked at the children of men with high PBB levels, and we found that their offspring were more likely to have a lower birth weight than the offspring of men with low levels. So there is something going on there along the male germline. And we do know that in animal studies that are exposed to endocrine disrupting chemicals like PBB, that you can see effects passed down the male germline for multiple generations. What we're currently working on, and we have now finished all of our data collection, and we are working on analyzing the blood samples and also analyzing the data. And I can share with you some preliminary results, which is that we did find an increased risk of certain immune system disorders, autoimmune thyroid disorders, rheumatoid arthritis, and multiple sclerosis associated with PBB. And that's preliminary. We're still analyzing that data. Many people ask about neurologic disorders, particularly dementia and Parkinson's. Unfortunately, we weren't able to look at that based on the questionnaire data because people with dementia and Parkinson's are not going to come to have their blood drawn and complete questionnaires. However, we have collaborated with the MDHHS, the Michigan Health Department, to do a match with death certificates so that we could look at overall mortality by PBB level. And even though Parkinson's and Alzheimer's or dementia is not usually the primary cause of death, you know, it's most of the time the final event is a heart attack. But if the person had these other diagnoses, those would also be listed as contributing causes. So that's our plan, is to look at these contributing causes of death in addition to looking at the primary cause of death and see whether it's related to PBB level. And cancer, of course, is very important, and so we are currently working with MDHHS and the Michigan Cancer Registry, thanks to Buzz Spaniola, who legislated the development of the Michigan Cancer Registry, and that will give us an update over the cancer studies that were last done more than 20 years ago. We also looked at, people asked about autism and ADHD. Fortunately, I guess we did not have a lot of autism diagnoses, and this is from the mother reporting the diagnosis of the children. But we did see that women were more likely to report that they had diagnosis of ADHD. And in fact, it was the same proportion as men, which is very unusual. So in the general population, ADHD diagnoses are more common among boys, about 4 to 1. And in the PBB-exposed population, it was 1 to 1 that we found. So that the women seem to have an elevated occurrence of ADHD. Now, another really important question that people ask us, and Melanie mentioned this, is how do we get rid of PBB? And there's really no recognized method. There's nothing, known to medical science that can help you rid your body of these persistent chemicals. However, we decided to accept the challenge, and we worked with collaborators in endocrinology and metabolomics and nutrition, and we devised a clinical trial of a lower fat diet and modest physical activity, and also use of an over-the-counter weight loss aid that helps you excrete more fat. And the idea is that if you're going to excrete more fat, that the PBB will go with it. So we successfully completed the study. 91 people out of 100 that we enrolled completed the entire 6 months. That is very, very unusual, especially because we were interrupted with COVID. And on average, people lost about 7 pounds went down by 2 inches. Also, their cholesterol and triglyceride levels went down. I can't tell you yet whether their PBB levels went down. Those samples are currently in the lab at Emory, and they are undergoing analyses. I hope we'll have results maybe in 6 months, and I think you've heard it's analyzing blood samples or even environmental samples for PBB is extremely time-consuming and goes through many steps before it can be quantified. So the third research project is one that unfortunately we haven't been able to complete, which is to look at these epigenetic changes, these changes in gene regulation in the children and grandchildren of men who were exposed. So in order to study this question, we needed to recruit families where the man was exposed, but the woman was not exposed, because if the woman is exposed, the child is directly exposed. So we wanted to know if these changes in the semen, these changes in the sperm, could be passed on. So we would need we would need the children and the grandchildren to give blood to be analyzed for these changes. We were only able to recruit 5 complete families, and I think that's because people are spread all over the country, and also some of the grandchildren are still quite young and their parents didn't want to have their blood drawn. So we are going to analyze the data on the 5 families, but we are hoping to revisit this question in the future in a way that we could mail kits to people who are out of state, because we've been just conducting all the research in the state of Michigan. If people have children and grandchildren all over the country, and we're hoping that we can have a system to collect blood in different places. But that will have to wait for more funding. Okay, so the last project that we undertook during this grant cycle is to work on a continuing medical education course. And this is because people said their doctors don't know anything about PBB. We developed this clinician information sheet that's at our table, but we were able to partner with Full Tilt Ahead, which is an e-learning private company that has a lot of experience doing continuing medical education, online courses. And I hope some of you have gone to their booth and recorded your stories of interactions with physicians, because we want this CME, just like the research, to be focused on the community needs, so that when the doctors and nurses take this course, they can hear from patients how they experience their interactions with the healthcare system. So, I don't know how long they're going to be there. If you haven't, they're gone. Okay. But if you do have something you want to share, let us know. Okay. And then finally, we want to make it easier for you all to access your PBB results. And so we have developed a participant portal. It hasn't quite launched yet, and I'm going to let Robert explain how this works.
Thank you. So the way that a participant portal will work, it will give you access to your PBB levels and any other chemicals we might have measured, starting from 2012 to present. We hope to be able to add the early years on, but at the moment it's 2012 to present. It's also a place you'll be able to update any research information you'd like to do with the registry, and update your contact information so we can
contact you when future research is available or when we have future findings as well. You will receive an email from the PBB registry email sometime this summer. We're going to be rolling it out in batches just so we can manage as people come forward. But we're excited that you'll be able to directly look at your results and to directly contact us if you have issues or questions.
So just real quickly, the reason why we created the participant portal to make sure you have access is because a lot of times we go to these PBB meetings and folks would say, can you send me my records, right? And we were like, oh, it's on microfiche. Like, this is a big ask, this is difficult for us. Or we could go back and send it and mail it out. But this way you can have access to your records when you want access to them, right? And I'm just wondering, showing hands, those of you that are willing, how likely do you feel like you would go to this portal once you have access? You can kind of think of it like a portal. Yeah. Okay, so people are interested in using it. Great. So that was just one of our questions. And then the other question we have about that is with how do you think we need to get the word out about the portal, right? So we have folks' emails, right? And we have to go through this process of making sure that it's just like, a medical process, right? Because it's health information, we have to make sure it's secure. So it's a little bit of a process. But if somebody isn't checking their email or we have their wrong email, that sort of thing, we need help getting the word out. So if you know other people, once you've received your email this summer, if you can just help other people know, right? We have our Facebook page, we have our web page, and then we'll be sending emails. But if that's not the right way to get in touch with someone, if y'all can help us get this information out, that would be great.
So at this time, I'd like to take any questions about the research results. Yes?
Yeah, we did a study where we collected samples for 6 months.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
We were part of a study that we collected samples for 6 months of our urine and sent it in, but never heard anything about it.
So how long ago was this? Was it, so the only study that we did that involved urine collection was a study of menstrual function. Was this part of keeping track of your menstrual cycle?
Yes, there was a whole questionnaire we filled out every
day. Yeah. So you should have received your results, so why don't you share your information with us and maybe, I'm not sure what went wrong, but you should have received your results from that study. Great. Okay, anything else? Yes.
Specifically, our grandson who's being treated in Toledo, which is like 3 miles out of Michigan. Is his information going to get put back into the Michigan Cancer Registry? Or we have to go get it special? We have to request it special? Or are they just not going to do it? Yes, he resides in Ida, Michigan.
Yes, then his records should be part of the cancer registry.
Automatically through the hospital.
Through that process.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. I'm going to give it back to Mel.
Great, so now I have some questions for you. And I see some young folks here and there in the room. And one of my questions is, how can we better engage what we would call like the next generation, right? So this can be folks who were born after 1974, because as Michelle just described, these are a lot of the people who are experiencing the health problems. And a lot of you have told us stories about your children, your grown children who are experiencing these. And we really would like some guidance from them on the research and how we go forward with the research, how we conduct it, how we reach out to people. But first we have to get them engaged. And so that's one of our questions to you, which is how do we get to the next generation? Or if anyone here is in that group and you're interested in joining our Citizens Advisory Board, that sort of thing, please let me know, because we really are interested in getting more guidance and input from what we would call the second generation or the next generation. So any thoughts here? It's hard.
I think it would be hard because, like, our kids are spread out all over. I think that would be hard, because our kids are spread out all over. But the kids that are born, they're like computer whizzes, so it might be an easier way, like online.
Yeah, so up here in social media, Facebook page, which we've definitely tried that, but obviously it's hard to get people's attention with this, right? So that's one thing we were thinking of is going through families, like having families try to help us reach out to their children. And the other thing is now that we've all been through the pandemic and we're good at meeting on Zoom, is we do meet on Zoom with our partners. So even if your children live out of state, that sort of thing, they can participate via remotely as part of this process.
I think I'm part of your generation. I'm not from here, but my parents were born and raised in Detroit. I'm not sure what my level of being affected was. But I'm here partially because Virginia history is still relevant today, and everyone's sharing all weekend, and I'm not very good at public speaking, thank you. And like I mentioned, the kids are all over the state and beyond, and I think just getting out stories that you guys are here as a resource, but also a story of what happened and what is still existing is really important. And if it is through social media, that's probably the best way. I've done informal surveys on Twitter where asked, are you under 40 or over 40? Are you from Michigan or outside of Michigan? And have you heard about PBB? And 95%, if they had under 40, it was because I had already talked about it on Twitter. And no one else has. So I know that there has been some coverage of it in the press, but I wish we had more people here right now to hear all the things I heard this weekend. And maybe that's more of an issue, reaching out either practically and getting folks to cover it on social media. I'm not on TikTok, but I hear that there's good stories being told there. And sharing what happened, maybe having that live on for folks, like, oh yeah, that's where my family's from, maybe I should reach out, and this is the way to do it. So I think that's definitely the way to go, because once people hear this, you know, I don't know how I originally stumbled on the story. I mentioned to my parents, they're like, oh yeah, that was a thing. And I'm like, I work for an environmental nonprofit, you never told me about this, that you were exposed to this. Once we hear about it, it sticks, and I think they know they're from this area, they'll find you, but it's just to get out more. Probably that could be enough.
Hi, fellow youth here. I had a rolling list of notes that I've been taking. But one of the things that struck me is this PBB conference organized with the help of at least 3 colleges that all have very strong alumni programs. And I know since roughly 1973, there's been a huge exodus of people from the state of Michigan. But those colleges still find a way to track down people that went to college in 1973 to ask for money. So there's got to be a way to reach out, you know, like learning something from the alumni network folder to say, hey, fellow Michigander, we're not asking for money, we're asking you to let us know if you know anything about the PBB, you know, disaster. Because, like Jen was saying, I mean, even the really quick bite video formats that are popular with the youths, I say that as a 35-year-old man. I mean, the visuals alone from the documentaries that have already been made in the 70s are so striking. Like, if that got into the hands of the right person that was much better with tech than probably anybody in this room, you know, they can certainly get it to make news for sure, because there's so few people that know about it. And I think getting a hold of, not necessarily Emory, I can't imagine there's that many people from Emory that, you know, lived in Michigan in 1973, but University of Michigan, Alma, they track me down my address, those kinds of things, so you can't, learning lessons from those alumni that have made things, I think would be helpful.
That's a great idea. Are you volunteering to make a TikTok video?
In this face? No.
I certainly don't want to do that.
Suggestion would be to engaging the youth, like the alumni associations, anyone who was in Michigan. Did your parents live in Michigan? Did your parents eat beef or cheese or consume milk in the 70s? If so, do you know of someone who has ADHD, or did you have an early menstruation, or rheumatoid arthritis in your family? Those types of questions are going to make people think, because a lot of people are concerned about EPA and other things, and so putting a spin on it that you are still impacted. I know that it's hard to kind of, I went to Detroit and I didn't know about it until I came to Alma. So, and then some of my fellow alumni still didn't engage with the issue because they didn't connect with farm families or didn't understand. But when you hear about it, that it's in all of us, then you start to wonder, maybe things in my family or myself could have been impacted by this, and so they might be more likely to engage when they know that it's inside of them.
Obviously, I'm not a young person. I am a first generation person affected by PBB. I won't get into that whole story. But one thing that I wonder about as I listen to everybody's stories, I have a background as a trauma therapist. And when I hear words like negligence and recklessness and cover up and no voice and victimization and something being in my body for decades that I can't do anything about, all of those are words that we hear in trauma-informed care. And so one of the things that I wonder about is looking at, I mean, we obviously have looked at this from many different lenses, history and the medical sciences and public health, and I'm wondering about the trauma lens. And, you know, how much has this been looked at through the lens of generational trauma? You know, this is maybe another angle to take on this. And I don't know if that would be something that maybe the next generation would be interested in, you know, in terms of looking at it from that standpoint.
Great.
Not to talk again, even though I refused to earlier. At least, so I coach track and field, and in the course of that, I run into a lot of people that I don't have any common ground with other than track and field stuff, and after a while you realize that's kind of boring to talk about. But my small talk thing for the best part of a few years has been, hey, do you know about PBB? And you'd be surprised at the number of people that go, I haven't heard that in X number of years, if they're older than me. And if they're younger than me, they have no idea what the heck I'm talking about. So, I mean, just making this like a little casual small talk thing is just enough to kind of like trigger memories, like, for better or worse, I guess. But even like yesterday, I ran into like somebody overheard me talking about it, and they're probably watching the live stream right now, or watching a video of it, because they were like, oh, my neighbor their farm got like just under the threshold, but the father died and all their cows died, but they were never compensated. Like, oh, okay, so it affected a lot of people, but nobody's talked about it since 1980 at least. So.
Robert, there's something. Thank you for those comments. I'll wait.
Melanie. I just wanted to tell you, probably one of the best tools you can use, you can link with 23andMe. There, I can't tell you the information that I have on there and the 497 relatives that I found on that system.
Wow.
It would be just a gold mine of being able to find and provide.
That's a really creative suggestion. I don't know the IRB rules, so our research has to be overseen by an ethics committee about how to use 23andMe data. I'm not familiar with anything. I think it's something worth us looking into, but I'm not sure about all the ethics that go around it for the consent process. But I think that's a really creative idea. Thank you. And I also love the idea about reaching out through the alumni networks. I think that's a really good place for us to look at. You know, my institutions also hit me up for money, so you're right, they find us. So they know where we're at. And your suggestion about the trauma, I think it's a really important thing, and that's another question I want to ask y'all, which are, right, I just want to give y'all an update. So right now, our research funding is running out. We have applied for additional funding, Jane Ann mentioned it, to maintain the database, but not to do more research yet because we need to finish analyzing this. But one of the things we want to ask you is, what are your priorities for us going forward? Have we touched on them here today? I know we've heard a lot about cancer concerns and things like that, but are there other priorities? And this gentleman just brought up one, which isn't our area of expertise, but the trauma associated with this, right? That's one priority we could add to the list. So I just want to pause there and find out if there are other priorities that you feel like you haven't seen addressed, but you haven't heard us talk about, but that you feel like need researching. Carrie?
As most of us know, our past records, or our family's past records, are being held
They're being held
captive,
hostage.
at Michigan State. All right, I mean, where
They're held in the state health department.
at the state health department. Excuse me, I was wrong. At the state health department. They will not release them to Gratiot County, which I think should be we've got a doctor here that wants them. We have a lot of people that want access to them. They could be released to each county that the farms were associated with. That's not being done. This is not an MDH oversight issue. This is public health. And we need to stand up and say to MDH, this is not your problem. This is not your billywag. You cannot hold our records of our family members that have passed without allowing us to get access to them. This goes to our public health. This goes to our children. This goes to our grandchildren. My daughter, like I said, I married into the farm. I shouldn't have had a high level. I have a 3.0 level. That's not acceptable. My daughter has a high level. That's not acceptable. We need to be able to reach what her dad had who was dead, which we do now have that accessibility. If I get the death certificate, I get the marriage certificate, I get permission from his wife when he died, I have to get all those, I have to jump through all those hoops. I do not have the permission to get grandparents' levels. His dad died from brain cancer. His brother has bladder cancer. His sister died from MS. This was a high
get some way of getting a hold of MDH and get those records released to the counties where the farms were situated.
So hi, so I am the health officer for Mid-Michigan, so I cover Gratiot County. So myself and the epidemiologist, we've had a meeting the last 6 months about this issue of the records possibly going back to Gratiot County. The entire state of Michigan has a sequence of how much time we have to retain records. We feel that this was an outbreak, and typically results of outbreaks or data from outbreaks is held at the county. So if there was a Legionella outbreak or if there was a hepatitis or salmonella outbreak, we would receive the records. We have PFAS records for the drinking water wells in Gratiot County, but we have been unable to do this and we have been stalled. So we are still looking at a way, and just this week I talked to the epidemiologist and we feel that we will continue to try and do this, but we have, like others, have not been successful in obtaining these records. Thank you.
Carrie, thank you for raising this issue. So, as Carrie mentioned, the State Health Department has developed a next of kin process for you to be able to request the records. The records would be sent to you. We do have these forms up here. As Terry mentioned, there are some barriers to that, right? Getting death certificates, getting marriage certificates, showing that you're the next of kin, that sort of thing. But as Terry mentioned, well, it's complicated. Well, she doesn't get to be the next of kin of her in-laws, but that's related to her children's exposure and so forth. And so we do encourage you. We have the forms up here. I'm holding one in my hand right now for the next of kin. If you're willing to fill that out. If you're not sure if the state has your health records, you can send the form in without all of those documents, and they'll first tell you whether they have your family member's record. So you can do that process first, and then they can, if they have them, then you can go through the process of getting those records. Now, having said that, Terry made another good point, which is it's difficult. You know, you might be the next of kin for one person in the family group, but not everyone. And those records aren't being used for research necessarily. And so I think it is really important for us to support the Michigan District Health Department in their efforts to continue to try to convince the state to allow them to have the records to do the research and to partner with us in the research. Because it does present some barriers. We won't go into all those complications, but the records that we have, people have consented to send to us. If you have not consented to send your records to us, we have transfer of record forms here, so those records can be sent to us. We'd really appreciate that if you're willing to share them with us. But it is a little bit complicated about which records sit at the State Health Department, which records sit with us, and how we can do different research with those different sets. So my last question to you that I want to pose is, you've heard about continuing medical education. And once we get this online, there's two things that I want to ask. I think the first question has pretty much been answered. Yesterday there were some issues raised. But will you, if this exists, are you likely to ask your doctor to take this course, your healthcare provider? So a show of hands, how many of you, once this is out, would go to your healthcare provider and say, please take this course?
I'm going to ask him tomorrow.
Yeah, it's not available yet.
I'm going to put it in his head.
Yep, perfect. Okay, so that's good to see. And our next question is, if one of you can think about this, what most would you want your healthcare provider to get out of this course, right? So in thinking about that, one thing that right now, and I think that you maybe mentioned this earlier, when you're diagnosed with something, rheumatoid arthritis, something like that, a lot of times the healthcare providers are going to say the treatment's the same, and that's the truth. The treatment's the same, right? We don't have a treatment for a PBB-related disease. That's what it is. The difference is the monitoring, right? So if you know you have this higher PBB levels, is that your doctor thinks, oh, we should keep it on our radar that we might need to check for thyroid problems at some point if you start having symptoms, that might be something. If you're a woman, make sure you're getting your mammograms, right? So understanding what you're at risk for and spotting it early, it's more screening and monitoring at this point. So I guess my question to you is, what would be your priority in this course for your healthcare provider to learn? Anyone have any thoughts along those lines?
Of course, it's me.
Yeah.
The first thing that they have to do and they're supposed to do right now is when you're being a nurse, I know this because I have to ask the questions. The first thing on your health questionnaire when you get a new doctor, they're supposed to ask if there's been a chemical exposure. They don't do it. They're supposed to ask that in Michigan. They don't do it. So first of all, you gotta get that done. Then you have to inform your doctor. You have to take these pamphlets. You have to take these pieces of paper with you. You have to inform your doctor. This is what I have. You have to give them your levels. You have a level paper. Give them your level paper. Give them these documents. They will correlate. We know that. We have to get this to the doctors. You start slow. You start at, how many doctors do I have? I have a primary, I have a rheumatologist, I have RA, I couldn't walk a year and a half ago. I'm not trying to a lovely drug, but I love it because I bought. You have to get it to your endocrinologist. You have to give it to all of the doctors that you have, not just your primary. Your primary does not talk to your endocrinologist. You have to get these things out there.
Great. Would anyone else like to answer about the priorities? Give a suggestion? All right, I know we're over time, so I'm going to start to wrap this up. One thing I want to let y'all know, as I mentioned, we are out of research funding right now, but we wanted to let you know, and for those of you online, once the results of the clinical trial are finished, and when we refer to clinical trial, that's trying to see if we can speed the elimination of PBB from the body. Once we have those results, we are going to come hold another community meeting to share those back with everyone. And we also hope to incorporate those results into the CME, even if it's finished, find a way to adjust it so that the physicians, healthcare providers hear that. And our last request of you before you leave is, are these on the table? Is to please complete an evaluation. The reason why of this meeting today, the reason why this evaluation is important is it lets us know, it guides us in our future planning for community meetings, but also it's a way for us to show and report back to our funders the importance of getting funding to do this community engagement. So we would really appreciate if you would fill this out for us. You do not have to put your personal information on there, just fill it out. And if you're with somebody else, if you could each individually fill one out, that would be really helpful for us. My last thing is, if you want to volunteer, especially that first generation or second generation, to be part of our advisory board or engage with us a little bit more and guide the research, feel free to put your name on the back, or if not, you can give it to Robert. Robert, raise your hand. You can give your information to Robert, and we will get in touch with you. Okay, so again, thank y'all all so much for coming and staying with us. I know that this has been a long conference and this has, gone over time. Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for trusting us with your personal information and data. Okay, I'll hand it back over to Brittany.
Thank you so much, PBB Registry Steve. You are our heroes, and we are so grateful for your time and your support and for your being here this weekend for the conference. So many thanks, and we appreciate you.
And you can just leave your evaluation forms on the table once you've completed it, and we'll come pick them up. Thank you. Yep, those can all be left on the table.
Okay, evaluation forms and pink forms on the table, please. So if you observations and closing remarks that I would like to share with you all. If it would give us 5-ish more minutes.
All right, I promise that we'll keep it short here. But first of all, thanks to all of you who shared the last 3 days with us. This has been an incredibly moving experience in so many ways. But I did want to just recognize a couple of people really quickly. Could I think most people have left, but any of the members of the organizing committee, could you just stand up? That includes you, Robert, over there. I see you. All right. This committee. For one thing, this was a 17-person committee, so a lot of people aren't here today. But they did so much work, week after week after week. Tom, of course, there as well. All of these people put in so much effort into this, and it really was, I think, a labor of love and respect and caring. They were great people to spend an hour with once a week. So I will actually kind of miss our Tuesday meetings, but we have one left because we need to do the evaluation sheets. So thanks so much to all of them. Just the last couple of people, somebody who I don't think actually gets recognized enough is Dr. Cheryl Dixon here, who is the head of grants for Alma College, and is the unsung hero of Alma College. She has brought so much money into this institution, has built so many programs, so many things would not exist here without her. So, congratulations. Fantastic. My hero in so many ways. Just a couple of other people. A lot of other people at the college really helped out quite a bit. Jenny Cooley and her whole crew in particular did tremendous work for us in working on things. Ryan Stout and some other people. And finally, just the last couple of things, and then I will let you go here. I just wanted to say heartfelt thanks to Katie Ragones, who has been my assistant through this conference. Literally, this conference would have just fallen apart without her running around and taking care of things behind the scenes. She's done tremendous work, and I'm really very proud of her. And then finally, let me just kind of hand things back to Brittany. Let me thank Brittany for being really the moral center of this entire conference. Her enthusiasm, her caring, and her kindness are what made organizing this possible. So, on behalf of Alma College, let me just say I'm so proud of what we did here over these past 3 days, and I'm so proud that you chose to come here and spend this time with us. So thank you all so much.
Okay, so over the past few days, I have been keeping notes of what I'm calling some emerging themes that stood out to me about the stories we've heard and the things that hopefully are yet to come. The first theme that I identified is accountability. We have to hold our public officials accountable. We have to hold public agencies accountable. We have to hold corporations accountable. The U.S. EPA, the Michigan DNR and Eagle, the Michigan Department of Public Health, now MDHHS, Farm Bureau, Welsical. We have to continue this fight. We have to continue reminding them that this is not over. Community power. Edie Clark last night or yesterday, Bus yesterday, and again today, remind us to, quote, not underestimate your strength. There's power in numbers. We are a massive community. We are, as Joseph Sonic said, a circle. There's power there. We also have to think about whose voices aren't in the room, who is missing. How do we engage with them? How do we bring them into the conversation and make sure their stories are heard, their stories are told? We have to keep asking why. There are so many whys tied to this disaster, as Jane Ann pointed out, as Dr. Elena Konis pointed out in the answer. because of the inadequate and deeply flawed approach to responding to exposures, which is one at a time. There's real significance in historical knowledge. Several of you have commented that we haven't learned from the past because these disasters keep happening. Last night, Buzz pointed out, quote, community safety has to be a #1 priority. How do we make sure our communities are safe now and in the future? I think we can learn from the past. I know we can learn from the past. As a historian, I believe we can learn from the past. The humanities more broadly can provide additional insights and offer perspectives that help us understand the PBB disaster. They can also help guide us forward. For instance, we heard from Nick Dixon this morning about philosophy and how morals and ethics drive laws and policy, and therefore action. Our morals are always greater than policy. How do we implement and translate that into action? There is significance in listening, of hearing community concerns, of seeking community knowledge, of noticing painful silences. Jane Ann spoke about references to the PBB disaster as an accident and asked, when does something stop being an accident? This was a disaster. This is an ongoing disaster. That's what the community is telling us. Collaboration between community members and community organizations, with partnerships between researchers and institutions. The model of community-engaged research implemented by Michelle Marcus and Melanie Pearson and the Michigan PBB Registry team at Emory. The CME course, continuing medical education, is an example and result of this collaboration. This conference is a product of collaboration between Alma, Emory, CMU, but driven by community members like Ed Lorenz and Jane Jelinek and Norm Keon and Gary Smith. One of the goals of this conference has been to mark 50 years since the PBB disaster and reflect upon its legacy, the human health consequences, the people impacted by contamination in St. Louis and around the state. Another goal is to think about the present and current community needs and concerns and identify ways to pursue them. How do we make sure that those in charge know? How do we continue to hold them accountable? We also have to be forward-thinking. You all already are thinking about future generations. That's in the Pine River Superfund Citizens Task Force mission. So many of you over the past few days and 50 years have consistently pointed out the importance of that, of acting now to protect future generations. How do we grow our circle to include those future generations? How do we grow our circle to include members of the Saginaw-Chippewa Indian Tribe of Michigan? How do we grow our circle to include migrant farm workers who were here and working on farms and exposed in the 70s? Who else is missing? How do we engage youth? What about nature and the intrinsic value of animals? Ed pointed out during his panel, one of his many panels, that we aren't done, and indeed we aren't, and you have partners and allies in this fight. So, as Joanne Scout would say, on. Thank you very much.
Just a few logistic things. If you want a snack on your way home, grab the extra lunch. And
And there's those postcards outside here, and then that clear drum, you can put your postcard in there with your story and see other people's stories. And